Hi, I'm David Price and I work for a company called Science Made Simple. I actually run Science Made Simple's northern office in the north of England. So I'm speaking to you from a little town called West Horton, which is near a slightly bigger town called Bolton, which is near a very big town called Manchester that maybe some of you might even have heard of. We're a science communication company. We've been going for 21 years. It was our 21st birthday, not all that long ago. I've been working for Science Made Simple, running the Northern office for the last 17 years. And we have three mission statements. Number one, and many science communicators rightly have this goal to try to inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers. We also try to act as a science translation service for the public. And we also try to increase the quality and quantity of dissemination within the scientific research community. Beyond that, coming to the more informal side of science communication, what we're really trying to do is to increase the footprint of science and science communication within society.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Purple Science Podcast. It's been a while that I've connected with you all, and not to mention, I was out there documenting new fascinating stories in science communication and education. I will spill the tea eventually in the coming episodes, but the most exciting update right now is that the India Science Festival is around the corner. This time, ISF is coming to Pune on the 20th and 21st of January. So, if you are in or around Pune during that time, do register yourselves for a fun filled event with science themed sessions, competitions, booths, games, and a lot more. But today, I'm here to recommend you a special session, No Points for Guessing, by David Price himself. David is a science busker, and don't worry, we have an entire episode discussing what that is all about and also give you a glimpse into what you're gonna get to experience at the festival. So sit back and enjoy the episode. All right. So I would start with the fact that I've gotten this privilege to meet you in person and not just meet you, but I have gotten the privilege to experience your work personally. But there are many audience members who might not know what science busking actually means. So, for them, would you like to tell what this term means? What does a career in science busking look like? And also, why is it important? So, what is science busking? And to elaborate on that question, why is it important?
It was also a very great pleasure to meet you at the Fast India Hyderabad Science Festival. Yeah, and this is a question we often get asked. Often, of course, we're constantly applying for funding to do science communication projects and activities within the UK, within Europe, and indeed around the world. And when we put science busking in those forms, very often we get a question back from the funder saying, "Oh, well, we really love your outcomes and your stated aims, but we really don't understand what science busking is. Could you run that past us again?" And so, okay, if we want to be formal about this, what is science busking? Science busking is the use of street performance techniques to deliver sticky science messages and stories that will make people stop, transient audiences anywhere, stop and listen and think and want to participate and maybe try those bits of science out at home themselves. Now, that's all very well, but I want to give you an example of this. I want to give you a little example of a demonstration,
Yeah.
a busk, we might call it,
Mm-hmm.
that we've used all around the world. And that was actually taught to me by a fantastic science communicator many years ago called James Piercy. Okay, get ready, people. What I want you to do is stretch your right or left arm. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to stretch my left arm out in front of me with my index finger raised. Careful who you're pointing that index finger at.
You
And
can't
then
see me, but I'm doing it.
this is it. This is it. We're
Yeah,
participating together in this exercise. So
absolutely.
then get your right arm, if you want, and stick it out behind you. Again, with your index finger raised. And what we're going to do, we've got 4 attempts to do this. With our eyes open, we're going to bring our back index finger, the index finger behind us, over our heads in a straight line, in an arc, to try to touch the index finger pointing in front of us. Here we go. Here we go. If you do it in time with me, so first attempt coming up, bring that back index finger over and try to touch the index finger in front of you, tip to tip. And I bet lots of you managed to do it. Success. That's 1. 3 more. And again. 2. But you all did that as well. And again. 3, touching those fingers tip to tip. And 1 more go, index finger to index finger, and go. And success. Well done, people. Give your arms a shake. Excellent. I bet the vast majority of us managed to do 4 out of 4. We hit index finger to index finger, tip to tip, 4 times. Now we're going to do that whole exercise again, but this time we're going to do it with our eyes closed.
Whoa. Okay.
So again, arm out in front of us, arm out behind us, index finger raised, eyes closed this time, eyes tight shut, and we'll go again. 1, 2, 3, first attempt. And I missed. So bring that back arm back, and second attempt. Go. And I missed again. And bring that back arm back, and go. Yes, success. And bring the back arm back, our final attempt. Eyes still tight closed. Go. Yes. Give your arms a shake. Give yourselves a little round of applause.
Okay.
Well done. I've practiced that a lot. On a good day, I can sometimes even get 4 out of 4, even with my eyes closed. Today, I was okay. Got 2 out of 4. But
Nice.
and I guess many of you will have got 1 to 3. Some of you might even have got 4.
Uh-huh.
What were we doing there? This is the question.
Yeah.
Well, that was what I would call a piece of science busking. So number 1, everybody was involved in that demonstration. Everybody who chose to be involved, who did that activity, it cost nothing, only time. We were all engaged in an activity that has a science story woven around it. Now, if you're interested in the science of that, what we were doing there, we just give ourselves some evidence that our bodies, our brains, and our nervous systems are able to find one part of our body with another part of our body. It's like this spatial awareness that our brains and our nervous systems have. So we can place one bit of our body in contact with another, even with our eyes closed. And it's got a beautiful name. Um, we love using technical language. Don't be scared of using technical language when you're talking about your science. People love it. Just make sure you define what that technical language means in everyday language. So people get the value of the word, but they get the value of the idea behind the word as well. And that word, what we were just doing there, was an exercise in proprioception. I can never spell it, but it's a great word. Proprioception. And I can give you another example that proprioception really works. Because close your eyes again, put an index finger up in front of you. Now you can't see it because you got your eyes closed. And without bumping your index finger into anybody who's near you, do be careful with that. I want you to move that index finger around when I say go, up, down, sideways, circular, draw a name, whatever you want to do with that index finger, and then follow my instructions when I say. Okay, here we go, people.
Ready.
Index finger in front of you. 3, 2, 1. Move that index finger like crazy. Up, down, sideways, round and round your head. That's it. Write your name, whatever you want to do. 3, 2, 1. Now put that index finger on your nose. I bet the vast majority of you managed to find your nose, even if you've been moving your finger around like crazy,
Yeah.
even though your eyes were closed. There's some more evidence that proprioception exists. That is an example of busking, where we can get everybody to participate and think about a little bit of science. That science becomes their own. They can take that away with them in their imaginations and in their emotions. They've had a positive experience around science. Why is busking? I suppose the second part of that question was why is busking based around street performance techniques? What do street performance techniques give us? Think of a street performer that you might see in a town hall square or a shopping mall or a market or a marketplace or any busy area.
Mm-hmm.
And they depend on their living. In a sense, they do not eat unless their techniques work well enough to attract and engage and hold, and if you think about it, inspire an audience to such extent for them that it becomes a financial transaction, that the public are prepared to actually pay this street performer for what they're doing. Now, in science busking, we very, 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 very rarely ask the public to pay. But those practices, those street performance techniques that help street performers make a living can help us inspire our public to think about science in a more positive way, to take that piece of science away in their minds and their hearts, to increase something called some science communicators these days call the science capital, that whole bundle of motivations and potential for recognizing the importance of science in our lives. And those techniques, you can use them anywhere. They can go to places. It's fantastic when the public might attend a science festival. That is a wonderful thing. I work a lot at science festivals. I am a very, very big fan of science festivals. We are a very big fan of science festivals, but not everybody can go to them for financial reasons, for physical reasons, for social reasons, for economic reasons. But busking can go out to these people and meet them in their communities and increase their science capital and give them a positive, engaging, inspiring experience around science being such an important part of our everyday lives. And I'm by far from the only science communicator who thinks that makes busking a really, really powerful package in the aid to the advancement of science communication.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that very energetic, fun opening to the episode.
No worries.
So, the reason I think that science busking is so amazing is because a few minutes ago I wasn't able to see you. All the people who would be listening to us won't be able to see us, but everybody was put into the single room of thought because of the activity that you just narrated. And that is so amazing about science busking. And as you said, it is so inclusive, so practical. You don't have to go to a busker, the busker will come to you. And as you said, inspire you to think about science in a positive way, which is what makes it so special and so important, I think, especially for all science communicators who are listening to this. So thank you.
No worries, no worries. It was a pleasure. The trouble is, I get so enthusiastic about these things, and I just go off on a tangent. But I think another thing to add to the pluses of science busking is not
Yeah.
always, but very often it's made out of very accessible materials.
Right.
Materials that diverse audiences and people would have access to in their daily lives. They already have them at home, or you could buy it off a market, or for not much. And so that as well only aids and increases its accessibility.
Right. And sometimes, as you did just now, we don't even need materials. It can start anywhere. But also, because you mentioned a little bit about street techniques, would you like to highlight how do you think street techniques are useful for science communication and your process of figuring out some of these activities and how they can help audiences in general? And because your audience is very wide, it caters to all ages, all backgrounds, everybody basically. So how do you think street techniques play a role in it?
I think street techniques have a lot going for them. I mean, very often we train researchers or science museum staff around the world in these techniques. And one of the things we are at pains to point out is, look, these techniques aren't just good for your science, they are also very good for you. They are also very good for your career. So the techniques that we might use to engage transient audiences, and by transient audiences, I'm talking about audiences who might have no vested interest in listening or participating in your material. They're walking along in a town hall square or that shopping mall or that market area, that busy pedestrian area. We use, and street performers are amazing at harnessing techniques, simple techniques. Let science communicators grab and inspire that audience. So I'll give you a little example. I was very lucky. Several years ago now, I won a scholarship to take me to the World Street Performance Championships. And I saw actually takes place in Dublin in Southern Ireland. If you're wondering where it takes place, I think it might move around the world, but it usually takes place there as well. Where all of these street performers from around the world aren't paid to travel to Dublin, they just turn up because they know that if they win the World Street Performance Championships, then really they're set for life. And I was watching all of these incredible performers uh, capture not just hundreds, but thousands of transient audience members. There was one of the guys who I was watching, he actually came third in the championships, and his whole act was based around sitting on a chair on top of a table so everybody could see him, and he prepared food with his feet and then got volunteers to eat that food.
What?
Uh,
This is fun. That is
he
really
had he had an audience. He had an audience. He
fun.
regularly had an audience of over 2,000 people.
Wow.
Just they were queuing up to watch that.
Mhm.
And it begs the question of what techniques do they use? And when you really watch them, I'm not the only science communicator to realize this, but what I realized was that the techniques they use are really simple and really
Yeah.
accessible. It is things as simple as using really good eye contact, using really good body language, um, using that incredible addition to any science communication routine, using Jeopardy, which is Jeopardy's hard to define, but I find it hard to define. But in terms of busking, it's that uncertain outcome, that entering something and you're just not quite sure how it's going to turn out. And it really piques your curiosity to keep listening, keep participating, so as you can find out. And things as simple as using props, using items, and getting the most out of those items and letting all of your public see those items and maybe even handing some of those items out to capture that audience, that immediate audience around you. Because once you've captured one member of the audience, it's easier to capture two and three and four and five and six. And it also almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the techniques that they use I think are accessible to everybody, and we fill our trainings with these techniques. The difference for those professional science buskers, sorry, for those professional street performers, is that they've been doing it for a long time. Most of the street performers who I met at the World Street Performance Championships, they'd been doing those same routines 15, 20, 25 years. So they become ultimately good at them. They become incredibly good at them. But that does not mean to say that we can't use those same techniques and practice them. Practice is so critical in any form of science communication. The only way we can get good at stuff is by practicing it. And in a sense, those street performers have practiced for a really long time, so they've got really good. And there's no reason why we couldn't do the same as well.
Absolutely. I think from what you said, I could figure out one thing for sure, that these techniques, they are not limited at all to one discipline or one field. They can be used anywhere, and it's a brilliant idea to use street techniques or performance skills in science, and as we have discussed once before, in science education as well. So I'd like your thoughts on this, but I feel that if teachers and educators and students are equipped with some of these skills, with these techniques, they can actually make science engaging and accessible in their classrooms. So it doesn't even have to, because it is so accessible, because these techniques in itself, they're so accessible. It doesn't have to be anywhere else. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't need any special things. Your everyday classrooms can be more fun. And not just for the educators, even if students are equipped with some of these techniques, they can engage better with their peers or with their educators. So I'd also like you to comment on that a
I
little.
absolutely, I could absolutely, I could only agree with that. One of my great joys is that schools sometimes hire and organizations hire us to go into schools and do science busking training with the pupils.
Fantastic.
And there's very little in science communication that I enjoy more than that. And I think organizations around the globe are beginning to realize the potential of science busking. There's now a national science busking competition, mostly for schools. In where is it? In Singapore, which I've worked at, and also now in China. In fact, when I worked in Singapore, this was a few years ago. This was 2012, and I've been the official trainer for the Singapore National Science Busking Championships twice. When I first went to Singapore, the winners of that competition, they absolutely blew me away. They were two 11-year-old girls. The team name was the Sci-Fi Girls,
Wow.
and they were utterly amazing. The science that they were advertising about like was volcanology, but it wasn't so much that grabbed me about them. It's just that they were so good at attracting and holding the attention of audiences. They knew every technique in the book, and they were utterly brilliant at it, and they were the deserving. I didn't have a vote in with the judges, but I was an advisor to the judges. I said to the judges, "Look, people, you have to think very long and hard before you pick anybody else than those two girls to win, because they were completely brilliant." And that was 2012, and I now think of those two girls. I don't know any of their histories, but I imagine them as maybe as newly qualified in the next few years as newly qualified scientists or engineers, using those techniques to sell their science to the world. Um, and this is what I was saying before as well. Don't forget, it's not just a great tool for selling our science, if you like. It's a great tool for selling ourselves, because how are you going to differentiate your science from that influential funder or organization that you really want to get to notice your brand of science communication? Science busking is a very, very powerful tool in terms of networking, getting our science and getting ourselves noticed. So there are benefits for science communicators as well as for the science in using busking techniques.
I absolutely agree. And the story that you mentioned about the two girls, I can totally imagine them being fantastic scientists, because even if they move on from busking, if you get that kind of experience, if you have that kind of fun learning science, if you are that inspired to learn science, I don't think there is any way going back. There won't be a dull moment in their science careers if they choose to pursue it. And plus, if they go anywhere else, also, if they go choose other fields, I definitely think that these techniques and these experiences will stay with them forever and will help them forever to disseminate science, so to speak.
Exactly, and at the trainings we provide, very often Science specialists aren't the only people who attend. There might be librarians,
Right.
social
Yeah.
scientists, curators from museums. Science busking, it's a package of skill sets, I think, that has really many uses in society.
Absolutely. So, coming to your background a little bit, I think, if I'm not wrong, you've worked in a science museum for 8 years.
Yes, indeed. I worked in the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester.
Right. Fantastic. So, if you can condense these 8 years of experiences into three takeaways or three major learnings.
Yes, so I worked in a science museum, a fantastic institution called the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. I started working there as an exhibit builder in two in 1998, and then eventually went on to become the museum science outreach manager. And I think with science museums everywhere and anywhere, interactivity is key. Also, I think that they are becoming increasingly aware that people are fascinated by people. And this means that presenters, enablers, facilitators, whatever the institutions call them, within science museums, have a hugely important role to play. Sometimes I might wander through a science museum somewhere in the world and find an interactive science gallery, wonderful things that they are, with no facilitation. And I always feel so no staff around to help the public get the most out of that space. And I always feel, oh, there's an opportunity lost there. I am a huge fan and will always be a fan of such spaces being continually staffed by presenters, if you want to call them presenters, because it's I got into science busking through doing that role, because sometimes in the museum where I worked, we would wonderfully find that there were very popular temporary exhibitions in the museum where in the school holidays would get really, really, really popular. And people would have to queue outside. Families would have to queue maybe for up to an hour before they could get into the space. And we felt as presenters, we felt, oh, that's a bit, you know, that's a bit of sort of empty time for our public. Can't we go out and meet these people as they're queuing and talk to them and ask them why they're there? And maybe even develop some little science routines to help them pass the time until it was their turn to go into the temporary exhibition. And I love that so much that actually became my start, my introduction, really, into using street performance techniques, gathering little audiences and things like that. And I still use some of those demonstrations to this very day. And a final point about any science museum, I think, is with the best will in the world, people who go to science museums, um, they tend to already be in love with science. Schools, family groups, whoever, they're going there because they realize the importance of science in our lives. And I'd sort of refer you back to the busking point I made earlier. What about everybody else? What about those families and those communities and those groups where for one reason or another isn't the case, and maybe they'd think about a science museum might be one of the last places in the world they might actually think of visiting. And of course, science museums do this, but it's a really great idea to have policies designed engaging and inspiring those audiences and finding ways of helping them to visit such institutions, or just as good, those institutions going out and meeting them. And that's where skills like science busking.
That is such a beautiful way to engage everybody into science. I think This is a brilliant idea, and it shouldn't be limited to one place or one community. It should be happening everywhere. I completely agree with you. And plus, I myself learn through conversations and interactions. So I completely agree that we need to have these discussions in order to make our science reach people, and it is relevant to them. So it's wonderful work that you're doing. So from your experiences at the museum, I'm sure that you've had a lot of them. If there are any anecdotes or any fun experiences that you've had interacting with the public, we would love to hear them.
Yes, yes, and you might imagine that science busking situations do tend to throw things up
Yeah.
um, quite quite a lot. I was once arrested while science busking.
Oh.
So you see, busking is a legally in street situations. Busking is an odd sort of thing. It's a strange animal
Uh-huh.
because if a busker is trying to sell a product directly to a member of public, then very often you require a license to do that in street situations. It's not
Mm,
as of itself a strictly legal thing to do. Um,
interesting.
the what happens is that the clause that means professional street performers and science communicators can get away without that license is because we aren't selling something directly to the public. What we are doing is offering a service, and the public to decide whether to make a donation or not. Now, for the professional street performers, that donation, yes, is often money, and for the science communicators, well, it's their time and their interest. So the public are offering us a donation of one form or another. Great. So there I am in London at a fantastic conference, wonderful conference called BIG, the British Interactive Group, big event. Fantastic conference to go to if you ever get a chance, you science communicators out there. Um, and it was in a time where busking was a really, really hot topic in science communication. Not that it isn't now, but it really was then. It really was then back in the day, back around 2009. And I'd won a professional development bursary from Big. And that's the funding that sent me to the World Street Performance Championships that we
Oh
talked about
wow,
before,
that's great. Okay.
which was fantastic. And part of the deal for getting me to go is that I come back and I run a session at the conference about the uses of busking, write a bit of a paper, but also I think in 5 cities in the UK, actually do a science busking set, a proper street performance set based around science. And so I picked a place, a fantastic venue called Green Park. So there I am in Green Park, having managed to attract a nice audience of around 80 people and having a great time. And I'd made sure I had permission to busk in Green Park from Westminster City Council. But this is Green Park in London, but what Westminster City Council had failed to tell me is that I also needed to gain permission from the Royal London Parks Commission, who actually look after the open spaces in London. And I hadn't sought permission from them, and they'd noticed me on a camera and called the police. And so the police turned up and put me in the back of the car, and I'm in a red sequin suit wearing an elephant hat, the hat in the shape of an elephant, if you can believe it. And they put me in the back of the car and gave me a stern talking to, and I explained my position and They said, "Look, okay, so we'll let you go on on the condition that you just pack up your performance, you don't carry on,
Oh.
and please don't do it again. Otherwise, we'd have to arrest you."
Okay. So, message to
So
everybody who's listening to this: have fun with science, don't get arrested.
yes, make sure you've got permission for where you're going to busk.
So, you're working with Science Made Simple currently, of course, and you've mentioned about it in the beginning. But if you'd like to add something to that about your role there and what all you do there, and any stories from your Science Made Simple experience.
Yeah, of course. It's a fantastic job. It's an amazing job. Many people think that science made simple is. I forgot to mention before that we're actually based. We actually run out of Cardiff, the capital of Wales. And they think that we are just a performing company, that we're going out running performances and doing trainings. And of course, that is what we do a great deal of. But we also work on commissions, where we're commissioned to write material for other organizations. And very often we end up training the staff in that material. So we do a lot of that. And the variety of things that we do and some of the things that we're asked to think about in terms of demonstrations is really interesting. We were working on a project a few years ago on Horizon 2020. That's a European Union funded project called Our Space, Our Future. It's a great idea. Not so much about the wonder of space, as amazing a place as it is, of course, but thinking more practically, really, about okay, if we're using space science more and more, what jobs does that create? Where might pupils or anybody who we're speaking to, where might they interact with one of those jobs? Where might they even get one of those jobs? And to do that, we had some case studies of researchers who, one way or another, were working in the space industry to tell us about their lives. One of them, wonderful researcher based in Bridgend in Wales, Sophie Durston. And Sophie is an oceanographer, and she uses satellites to track this incredible seaweed called sargassum that grows in the Sargassum Sea. And the Sargassum Sea is an incredible place in itself because it's a sea without any land borders. It is only surrounded by other seas, and that still messes with my head to this day. And because of things like global warming and climate change, that seaweed is growing and growing and growing and growing and growing massively, and it doesn't have any roots. It's not anchored to the seabed, so it drifts. And it drifts onto the coast of Africa and particularly onto the coast of South America and becomes a real nuisance. It ends up rotting and it affects the fishing industries as it gets washed ashore. And it also affects the tourist industries in these places. Tourists come along expecting to use their buckets and spades and have a lovely beach holiday. And instead, that beach is covered in to a 2 meter depth with rotting seaweed. Not great. Sophie's job is to monitor that seaweed so they can tell governments and authorities, look, you're going to get a lot of this seaweed coming along, and get some measures in place to be able to move it, maybe even one day to divert that seaweed, and that's still being worked on. How do you represent that in a demonstration? How do you represent that in a science demonstration? And I was watching a football match on television. And I saw, sometimes when you see football matches, they have these massive flags that the crowd roll out and then roll back with the name of the football, the insignia of the football team on it. And I thought, what if we did that with an audience? What if we got a flag or a piece of material the same color as the sargassum seaweed, and got them to pass it hand to hand over them until they were all completely covered in it, and then throw some beach balls and buckets and spades and things that you'd use on your holidays onto the top of that seaweed and say, how are you going to use it now? Can you see the problem, the very real problem, financial problem that Sophie is using space science to help the world combat? And I quite liked that little demo. So we get paid to come up with demonstrations like that, and it's an absolute wonderful thing to be able to do that.
That is important everywhere, irrespective of where you are. I think there's a lot of need for the work that you do across the world for sure. And in fact, this was going to be my next question. Can you define some challenges that you face while translating these complex scientific concepts that you're asked to into these entertaining and accessible performances? So you mentioned that you have a lot of challenges doing that. If you could tell us a little bit about your process. So one part of the question is, what are the challenges that you face in making these science concepts palatable to people? And then the second is, what is your process for doing that?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think one of our problems, and the problem of any science communicator, is to make sure that we actually get the science right. That we don't, we even with the best intention in the world, end up misleading people because we're talking about a bit of science that is incorrect one way or another. And I'm very lucky that I work with a whole group of professional scientists in science made simple who can help us along that process. Also, we're working very, very closely and more with researchers who are helping us to provision these science communication experiences for whatever audiences we're looking at. And more researchers are incredible people, and we train them a lot. But also, we're using their ideas for where to guide us really in terms of demonstrations that are really going to illustrate the science principles we're looking for. I think another thing, I think a problem for all science communicators is where to get the funding from. In an ideal world, then our science communication would be free at the point of contact, free at the point of use. But sometimes we're a limited science communication company. We're not for profit, so any profit we make is immediately ploughed back into science communication. But having said that, if we don't make a profit, then we would very shortly go out of business. So one way or another, there has to be some form of financial transaction for a sustainable view of science communication, and it's where and who do we go to funding for. One fantastic piece of news that UK science communication companies got is that we are now back into the Horizon 2020 funding stream, which we'd been taken out of because of Brexit. And you might agree or disagree with what happened in Brexit, but nonetheless, it did have that effect. That it was far harder for UK organisations to participate in that funding stream, and now that's become more possible again, which is fantastic news. And Trish, I've got to admit, I've completely forgotten the second half of your question.
Yeah, so I was saying, if you can tell us about your creative process also a little bit. How do you come up with ideas for your science performances? And how do you implement them? Because I'm sure that there's a lot of difference and distance between coming up with an idea
and then actually turning it into a performance. So if you can tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, well, I mean, for ourselves working in the UK, if we're working with schools, and we don't just work with schools, but we do work a lot with schools, then schools and teachers are really interested in the national curriculum, the sort of the science learning structures that schools have to adhere to. So that can often be a source, the very beginning of a topic. Okay, what are we going to illustrate that is actually going to be of use to schools within this within this science topic? We get our ideas all over the place. I often get my ideas when I'm going for a walk, as I said before, by talking to researchers, increasingly, in fact, that is where we bump into ideas and start to investigate ideas. Told you about the football flag story. Another example that came actually not from a researcher, from a patent lawyer. And we were working with a patent lawyer in that same project in Our Space, Our Future to try to help them to talk to pupils, it was in this case, about how do you get involved in space science as a patent lawyer. And they had some very lovely examples, but they were very removed from everyday life. And we were trying to search around and find something within the patent lawyer's experience that might chime and resonate with actually young teenage audiences. And this researcher had one of the patent lawyers, sorry, he had worked on copywriting a certain type of chocolate that is very popular within the UK. Apologies to people who might not have heard of this. It's something called the Terry's Chocolate Orange. It's a bunch of chocolate segments shaped like an orange and wrapped in some heavy duty orange coloured aluminium foil. And he actually patented the action and the sound of opening that chocolate by hitting it on a table, and that cracks the joints between the segments of chocolate orange, and then you open the wrapper and you can eat the segments individually. And this really got us thinking about, okay, well, if we're going to, so we told the other science, more space related stories for this patent lawyer, but then we brought in that as an example of the crazy things that patent lawyers can end up doing. And it got a lot of really interesting feedback from the pupils that they hadn't realized that even things like bars of chocolate had to be patented.
That is so bizarre. I really can't imagine. My God. But these are the experiences when you appreciate your job in science communication, isn't it? Just,
Very much so.
yeah,
Very much so. It's a privilege to be put in situations where we get to talk to these people. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned about your work at Science Made Simple. Usually, so I do science and theater, and usually when I tell people that science and theater and of course science busking can be used as tools to disseminate science, the usual query is that yeah, sure, it can initiate it can give rise to that initial curiosity in science. For sure, it can explain the basic concepts and everything, but do you feel that this can be used as a tool for understanding and communicating science concepts in a larger picture? Do you think that these performances have a larger application beyond just initiating or giving that initial trigger of curiosity in people?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's a question that science communicators, ask of themselves and each other um, on a regular basis. What do we do? What does it achieve? And as a little science made simple example, so we do lots of science shows, curriculum focused science shows in schools. But if I stand back and I sort of ask the question, okay, and we go to endless pains to make sure that our shows are curriculum specific, but do schools hire us to for that show, whatever it might be, to teach a particular part of the curriculum to a school group? I don't know, let's say prior to an exam or something like that. And I think the answer is largely no. That information is there is fantastic, of course, and it needs to be there, and it's helping those pupils to become more familiar with that curriculum science, and that's a great thing. But I think schools are really hiring us just as much for the inspiration as for the information, so that these pupils can leave having allied science to a positive experience and having seen science more or as a key part and an increasing part in our lives. Interestingly, in the UK, we're finding that more and more the departments in schools who actually hire us are the careers departments. The schools want science to be projected to the pupils, with half an eye, with some thought about, wow, that science is connected to that job. So there's a little reflection from our work in schools, and I think overall science communication can have a great role in popularizing, and it really it's harking back to what I to what I said before, so that anybody can see science as more a part of their lives, maybe particularly more a part of our lives in terms of a job that they might aspire to do. But even if that wasn't the case, that science is part of our lives, that science is an increasing part of our lives, that we, as part of communities and societies, when we're asked to vote on such things, can be more in a position of understanding science, of not being wary of science, and being able to engage in discourses around science. Hope that answered what you're asking me.
Yes, yes, it absolutely did. I completely agree with you. And I think the story that you told earlier, the seaweed story, was very relevant here. So that's the thing, when we look at bigger problems, you can't tell people big science and expect them to be empathetic towards these problems. You have to make them relevant, and that can only be done through these palatable and accessible performances. So I think that in that way, both science theater, science busking, science performances, they have a lot of value, I feel. So, I would also love to ask if, apart from these live performances, do you have any plans to expand your impact, such as through online platforms or collaborations? Or, well, you mentioned your collaborations with educational institutions. So, is there anything we should look forward to? Do you have plans on enlarging your impact?
I think, I mean, we're all about collaboration. As we go forward, we end up collaborating more and more and more with different bodies and scientific and educational solutions, institutions. I've already mentioned our space, our future. Um, Also, there was a project called that we worked on in the UK with Oxford University called Thinking, Doing, Talking Science. All of the projects that I'm mentioning, if you look them up on the internet, you would find extensive resources about the educational findings that we came to. Thinking, Doing, Talking Science was an absolutely lovely project, and I think
I
it's
love the
applicable.
title as well. It's so beautiful. It's amazing.
It's about exactly that. It was about
Mhm.
pupils getting pupils
Uh-huh.
to follow the scientific process, yes, to accurately record their experiments in classrooms, but
Right.
also to think, to engage in higher order thinking more around science topics, to be encouraged to use their curiosity. It was a project, a joint project between Oxford Brookes University and Science Oxford, which is the Oxford's local science centre. And what they wished to do was to get pupils in science lessons to record their information in a good, rigorous scientific way. But while they were doing that, to engage in more thinking, creative thinking around science, questioning, curiosity, to bring those absolutely to the forefront of how those science topics were taught. And this was mostly for upper primary school children. So that would be 10, 9, 10, 11-year old children. And that project ended up being called Thinking, Doing, Talking Science. And Science Made Simple, we were subcontracted really to be the trainers of teachers for that project in the north of England. And that's what myself and my colleague Ruth did for about 2 years. And it was fantastic project. Um, Thinking of, and this is using wherever possible, everyday materials, only science that you could fit into a standard science lesson, and using everyday materials, but really to encourage that curiosity and higher order thinking. I think that was a fantastic collaboration we did with educational institutions, and then there was another one. Uh, Again, a Horizon 2020 funded project called Perform, and that we worked that there with institutions in Spain, Italy, and France, each to champion a form of science communication. They happen to be science busking. That's maybe no surprise for Science Made Simple, and science cloning, and stand-up science. That's comedy science, for using comedy to get
Interesting.
science ideas over for Spain. And each country, each cohort, actually, how can I say this? Work with researchers to get the researchers to create their own, in our case, science bus talking about their science. And then we went into the schools, and the researchers and ourselves worked with the pupils to help them create the pupils' own busks around the science they were interested in. And each country, in various ways, did that, and it was all about how can we use the performing arts to help pupils to buy into science and see science as more as something that belonged to them, and they could express their interest to other people. And so there are just three examples amongst many of educational projects. There's one that's still continuing at the moment, and that was called Action Against Stunting. That means Action Against Growth Stunting, the Action Against Stunting Hub. And that's UK Research and Innovation funded. And that's working in Hyderabad. in India, in Senegal, and in Indonesia, to try and identify what are the causes of growth stunting in children, and they are many and varied and complex. And are there some solutions that we could be put in place to help, reduce the occurrence of growth stunting?
This is wonderful. I'm so glad that you mentioned all of these varied experiences because this in itself tells how much science performances and how much science busking can have an impact, irrespective of where you are and irrespective of what the problem is. It can be addressed with these performances, which is brilliant to me. But I think this conversation will be incomplete without asking you about your experience in India and at India Science Festival. How was that?
It was, Shrishti, thank you so much for asking that because it absolutely blew me away. So I'd been hired as part of the Action Against Stunting project and partly by the Fast India Science Festival
Yes, yeah,
to
that's
go
right.
to travel to Hyderabad in January this year
Hmm.
and run some busking material for festival audiences, and then also take that material into schools and into some science centres around India. And of course, I'd never been to India before with such material, and so I had no idea how it'd go down. And it's such a pleasure to say that Indian audiences absolutely loved, were fascinated with the concept of busking and what it was, what it could do. And every time I started performing, I was mobbed, if you know, surrounded by people, by curious faces, wondering what was going on, wanting to participate. It had always been my best guess that busking would go down well in India because if you see, on TV and and in the media, you see your typical, I don't know, street situations in Indian towns and cities, and they're so colourful and they're so lively, and there's people love watching other people, and so it was my best guess that street skills would go down really well. Of course, when I got to India, I also found that in science, some forms of science communication and other subjects, you already have that street scene. And your colleagues introduced me to science skits and how they run, and these mini flash mob dances that might
Yes.
pop up talking about particular topics. And it was incredible to meet people who do that.
I'm sure that science busking will be a hit in India because we love performances, we love storytelling, and of course, we are curious. So that's a wonderful idea. And I can't ever forget that picture of you performing and students being so the pure joy in their on their faces and the curiosity, and they were so engrossed in your conversations. It was amazing. And I remember that you had to do more shows than you intend to do because wherever you walked, people would surround you, kids would surround you, and then you had to perform for them. That was a treat
I
to
mean,
watch.
it worked. It was such a lovely event because I was able to do the busking, if you like, on a stage to audiences that had been gathered, that had specifically come along to that stage. But what I also did and love doing is just literally filling my pockets and putting things, around my shoulders and hanging things from my belt and walking along and gathering audiences, impromptu audiences, wherever I could see any people sort of standing still long enough to talk to them. Uh, at the festival, and it was a complete joy to find that worked very well with Indian audiences. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for saying that. And thank you for joining us. And I hope that I get to experience her performances again soon in the future. And I hope that more science buskers like you can be seen disseminating science, spreading science, and spreading the joy of learning to people. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ruti, for asking me. About it's been fantastic to have a conversation with you. Yes, that would be an amazing to find more people giving busking a try, trying
Absolutely.
to represent their science through a skit. It would be amazing.
Thanks for tuning in to the Purple Science Podcast. We share stories every Tuesday. Our inbox is always open for your feedback, and our DMs across all social media platforms linked in the description are open to your unique stories. If you know somebody who might benefit from this, do share the podcast with them and spread the joy of learning.